That was
Hi.
very professional.
Hello. We are live. Yeah, we're just here with Dr. Ben Weinstein. He's our Calm Collective advisor. We turn to him for lots of questions around how we build out our peer support program, Calm Circles. We also train facilitators, so Ben has been an instrumental part of developing that. And we're here today to talk about navigating grief and loss at work. It's going to be a pretty laid back session. Ben, what are your immediate thoughts when you think
Well,
about this
let me
topic?
first of all, I just want to say hello, everybody, and as always, thank you, Sabrina, and thank you everyone on the Com Collective team. It's always such a pleasure. You guys are doing such amazing things, and it's such a pleasure to be able to support that, to really help people have these conversations about mental health. So welcome everybody, because I do think this is a really important time for us to be talking about what it feels like to be dealing with change at work and how that's feeling emotionally, energetically, and motivationally. This is this is a really important time because I'm hearing, I don't know, up here in Thailand, because I'm based in Bangkok, up here in Thailand, having a lot of conversations with healthcare professionals, with doctors, nurses, allied healthcare professionals, even medical school teachers, and we're hearing that a lot of folks are not feeling a big amount of relief, Sabrina. They're feeling more tired, right?
Yeah.
And more worn down, and looking for solutions as if the demands kind of haven't let up. What are you hearing?
Yeah, hearing a lot of things. So, as we talk to clients, even friends, a lot of people are just going through a lot of changes these days. I think the reality is that the economy has still been very unstable, to say the least, and a lot of
Mm,
companies have been playing cautious. We're still hearing lots of layoffs happening, and the subsequent effect that it has on the people directly
right.
impacted. Obviously, there are a lot of losses happening. And also the people who are left behind, they're experiencing that survivor's guilt. They're also experiencing just higher workloads, trying to make sense of everything, changes in their team dynamics as well. And it sounds like it's been pretty overwhelming. And so that's just like within the organizational context, right? But when you scroll on, I mean, I don't know about you, but I've been like doom scrolling sometimes, and it's there's a lot of equal anxiety also coming up.
Yeah, and I think I'm so glad you mentioned doom scrolling, Sabrina, because I think there's something really important here because we're doing our best to be resilient. All of us are doing our best to be resilient, right? I think, and I want to invite everybody who's listening to, who's watching, to feel free to share how you're feeling about your stress level or what's stressing you these days, apropos of what Sabrina's just mentioned. But I think that there's a lot of anxiety provoking and stressful, stimulating stuff that we find in our social media feeds and our news feeds, whether, about ecological things, about war, about global and economic instability, right? And I think that even if we actually still have a job, still have a roof over our heads, still have a paycheck, still have health care, still things are going reasonably well in our own lives, right? There's a lot of things coming in that might feed our own either losses that we've experienced, and that kind of constant stimulation of stress and anxiety doesn't help us to deal with that, or it's fostering a fear of what might happen next week or next month, which prevents us from being able to be resilient today. How are people feeling about that?
Yeah, yeah. If you're tuning in, feel free to share what's been on your mind these days, any stressors that you're facing, anything you're worried about. And then, I'm also going to take this opportunity to share my own stress. I mean, it's a lot going on, right? Like I'm hearing a lot of folks just saying that we have to shift to this new normal again, going back to the returning to the office, finding a new schedule amidst all of these changes. Personally, I've also been hearing a lot of friends talk about, health scares or losing loved ones to, yeah, to various illnesses, and just kind of like what I'm hearing a lot of is just, okay, all of this shit is happening right now. I just gotta get on with it. So, yeah, cost of living is also definitely something that's been a stressor of mine as well. Junior, thank you for sharing. Um, and I guess the question I have for you, Ben, is, when all these changes, these losses happen, or when changes happen, what's actually happening there?
Yeah, it's such a great question because it's so basic, right? Like a change is a disruption in routine. It's a disruption in a kind of status quo. Because what happens is, on the one hand, as human beings, we have a remarkable ability to adapt to things, a truly remarkable ability to adapt to things. For example, there's research showing that when people suffer debilitating accidents, right? For example, if someone's in a car accident and they become a paraplegic, they become wheelchair bound, there is an initial dip of their life satisfaction and unhappiness. But for many people, and of course, this is based on group averages, it doesn't apply to everybody in that situation, and people's individual circumstances are different. But on average, people who've suffered a debilitating life change, they're able to adapt to it, right? And if you go back 6 months or a year or 2 years later, their life satisfaction and their happiness have kind of basically more or less returned to where they were at the point where they went into that big change. Now, of course, that's a big, dramatic change. So, on the one hand, we have this great ability to adapt to change. On the other hand, and the same also holds true in the opposite direction. Like for people who win the lottery, there's this initial big boost. Or people get a job they wanted, or when people get married, for example, or get partnered. There's this initial big boost in happiness and satisfaction. And then over time, it kind of gradually returns back to where they were before. So we have this tendency to adapt to big changes in our life, but there's also a cost. There's a way that uses our energy to make those changes. Something that's really important is that we acknowledge that change is happening. This is one of the most difficult things about grief, because grief, on the one hand, is normal and human. It's a reaction to loss, and usually we think of it as a reaction to the loss of connection, right? Well, obviously, most of us associate grief with death. We have lost someone we love. But in fact, to lose a job is also an enormous loss. Or even if I haven't lost my job, to lose a role, right? Or to have my role change, that can be a big psychological loss as well, especially if I was very identified with something, right? If I was identified with a certain role or position or status, and I'm having difficulty kind of naming and letting go of that over time, that's going to create more grief and stress.
Is there, we are talking about loss in the context of, I mean, like grief in the context of loss. Is there a healthy way to grieve? Because, a lot of people may find themselves feeling very attached to that loss that happened.
There's absolutely healthy ways to grieve. In fact, I would say that grief itself is a healthy experience, right? Grief is, it means, all grief means, all a reaction to change and loss means is you too are human being, right? That's it, right? This kind of sense of common humanity. Now, again, you might wish that you didn't have those emotions. You might wish that you didn't have those reactions, but that doesn't make it abnormal, right? And this is super important to understand that this is what's happening. This is being human. This is having a reaction to change or to loss. And then, of course, the hard question is this: when you're dealing with change, what do you need to adapt to it and deal with it? Because I can sit up here, and if you Google, or if you go on TikTok and you search for grief and loss and how to deal with grief and loss, you'll find a whole bunch of self-appointed experts, right? People who have a phone and who can talk into their camera, right, who want to tell you how you should live your life, right? Or you'll find a bunch of psychologists like me who are like, well, here are the five blah blahs of grief, right? But and sometimes those can be really useful, especially if you feel lost or completely at sea. But you have to take all of that with a grain of salt because it's fundamentally a form of like recycling. Someone saying, well, this is what worked for me, so you should do it. Well, maybe it'll work for you, maybe it'll work for, maybe it won't, because we're all a little bit different. And I think that you really have to be open to the idea of really sitting down and saying, okay, I'm going through something. It doesn't mean anything bad about me. So see if you can name it and reduce the stigma straight off the bat. That is the starting point of self-compassion. Looking in the mirror and saying, you know what? That person's a human being, right? There's nothing wrong with them. They're not weak. They're not defective. Human being, right? So you name your experience, you say you're human, then you look in the mirror, you sit down and you do some reflection. You say, as I'm going through this, what's going to bring out my best? What do I need to deal with? Do I need to exercise more? Right? Do I need to connect with friends more than I usually do? Do I need to go out and be in nature? Or do I need to pull back on the throttle? Right? Do I need to kind of slow down for a period of time? I might not want to do that, but right? Or I might not be used to doing that. I don't know about you, Sabrina, but during the pandemic, I kind of sped up,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I feel like,
Same here.
I kind of sped up and I was doing the same things I was always doing and a little bit more, right? Because there was all this change of doing stuff online and working from home. And, you and I were both offering all these kind of workshops and support for people. And I thought in 2022, okay, I need to pull back. But one of the things I realized in 2023 was I actually hadn't pulled back. I stopped taking new projects, but it felt like I was working really hard, right? And in 2023, I'm actually trying to pull back the throttle so I can kind of process what it is that's going on, because it does feel like there's been just a huge amount of change, and change is still happening.
Oh, definitely. I'm still feeling that. Like, there's just lots of change happening. And, one thing I've realized around how different people cope with change is that it seems that, the same change or loss that has happened can affect people in such different ways. Do you know why that's so?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's really important to appreciate individual differences. That's part of what psychologists call individual differences. On the one hand, I think I want to go with the bedrock of what I just said, right? Don't stigmatize yourself, right? And really sit down, even if you just take 5 minutes and say, okay, what do I need that's going to help me bring out my best? What really kind of feeds me, nourishes me, encourages me, recharges me as I'm going through this. And not just for one day or for 1 week, but just assume this is a phase, of change, of grief that you're going through, right? Now, there are some important individual differences related to personality, because what the research says about this is that folks have different temperaments. Sabrina, we call it so. And the most scientifically valid model of personality, some folks may already be familiar with, is the so-called Big Five, the 5-factor model of personality, right? And in fact, one of those factors is strongly related to coping with change. So now, for those of you who don't know, we use the acronym OCEAN. I think some of you may already be familiar with it. So it's openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and the last one, need for stability. Okay, and we're gonna circle back around on one, because that's the one that relates to dealing with change. Now, as I said, this is our best scientifically based model of normal human personality, right? That's based on a ton of data that's been globally validated. So the N is the one that's relevant here, the need for stability. Now, if you Google this, if you look this up, you're going to see that a lot of people call that neuroticism,
Yeah.
right? And that's how I was trained. I don't call it that. I think that that's old and it's pejorative, it's stigmatizing, it's incredibly derogatory. So I prefer, I'm in the group of therapists and psychologists who call that part of personality need for stability. And there's this continuum that there are people. So basically, this part of personality has to do with how much a person's emotions tend to vary. People who are low in need for stability tend to have very stable emotions. I was in business once with a guy like this. He woke up. I knew the guy for 10 years. You woke up with him every single morning, every day. He was just the same. He'd pop out of bed full of energy, go through the day full of energy, go home, make dinner. He was just incredibly stable. So he was kind of low. I don't know this for a fact, but I would estimate he was low in need for stability, right? People who are high in need for stability tend to be emotionally reactive. And when they get stressed, they can be more easily worried, more easily anxious, right? Now it's really interesting because actually, if I can personally self-disclose, I'm actually relatively high in need for stability, right? Based on when I've taken the personality test, I'm about a standard deviation above the mean in
Oh,
terms
that's
of
quite a lot, yeah.
thanks, right? But what that means, it actually turned out to be incredibly valuable that I know that about myself, because all it means is that I need structure and routines. And when I stick with my structures and routines, I'm good, right? When I'm able to exercise regularly and do my meditation and do the things that work for me to bring out my best, um, uh, stress just doesn't get to me. And if I don't do that, I really start to feel it. And this was an issue, right, for me, because I think it made COVID more impactful, and it made what we're dealing with, you know, after COVID more impactful for me, in part related to that. So, and I think it's really useful for people, and there is a free version. There's a free version of this test that people can take online. Please don't go on whatever your social media or on the web and pay money to take one of these garbage psychology, fake psychology tests. They're almost all garbage psychology. But there's actually something called the International Personality Item Pool, IPIP, which is a kind of open source version, and psychologists have created a version of the what's called the NEO, a Big Five personality inventory that people can take. And I think maybe we can share the link with
We'll
folks
share
later.
that in a bit. Yep.
It's completely free, not at all commercial. There's two versions, right, that you can look at. I think you want to look at the main scale scores, the five central scales. The subscale scores are less reliable,
Right.
especially, yeah.
And so the idea is to get awareness of what your
Mhm,
personal needs are.
mhm,
But I guess I have a question for you, Ben, because I feel like with all the changes happening these days, there's no way to run away from it. So
mhm.
for someone who has a high need for stability, what's actually the best way to adapt to all of that?
Well, absolutely. And we don't, I'm not in the business of encouraging people to run away from things, right? My business is helping people to live the life that they want to live, right? Because thank heavens, right? You're alive. All of us are alive right now. We're breathing, right? We're breathing. And, as John Kabat-Zinn says, if you're breathing, there's more right with you than wrong with you.
It's true.
And, and the question then is, you have this wonderful gift. You have this wonderful human life. It might not feel wonderful every moment, right? You have this wonderful human life. So how are you going to live it today? Right? And so we have to be really aware of that, knowing that you can't, and I don't have I don't think everybody's trying to get everything they want every day, but you have to understand that life isn't perfect. You're not perfect. I'm not perfect, right? It's going to be messy sometimes, but how do you do the best with it today? That's one of the problems with doom scrolling, because doom scrolling isn't about today. Doom scrolling is always about tomorrow or next week or next year, right? Like someone mentioned, like Junyu mentioned, the cost of living. Okay, but how are you doing today, right? Because you have to balance how you're taking care of getting ready for tomorrow and next year, getting ready for your healthcare expenses or your kids' college expenses or your own retirement. And it's prudent to prepare for those things. I'm not saying don't prepare, but how are you taking care of your mind and your heart today? Right? Because the truth is if that if you're overwhelmed with negativity today, just living through things as they are, there isn't going to be a point. If you remember what I said about people who end up in a wheelchair or people who end up winning the lottery, there isn't going to be a point when you might end up in a situation where your mind's going to continue to generate negativity, even when you've already think you supposedly got all the things you thought you wanted.
Mm.
Because
Yeah.
every day we're training our minds to be a certain way.
Mm.
That it, so I like I'm thinking about with Tanner's comment in the like that sense of like um someone is going to come and take what you have, right? And of course, there's many workplaces where that's true, right? And you have to be careful and you have to deal with that, but it's also a mentality. It's a mentality um uh of of feeling under threat.
Mm.
And if the folks listening, if the folks watching, if you're feeling under threat all the time, like someone's coming for what you've got, I really want to encourage you, A, to take a breath and stop, because that's suffering,
Mm.
right? If you're
Mm.
feeling under threat all the time, that's suffering. And then number two, to ask yourself, how are you going to deal with that? Because either A, is there some change you can make so that you're not going to be under that threat? Or is there a psychological shift you need to make? Is there a psychological shift you need to make in order to deal with this environment without constantly feeling under threat?
Mm. Mm. So I think we're just gonna, yeah, bring ourselves within the context of the workplace environment, right? So if there are, I guess, difficulties, losses that we're currently facing, what's a good way for us to share with our, teams, our colleagues, that this is something that we're experiencing?
Yeah, this is, I mean, and this is, I'm really aware of the comment that Kevin has just made in the, in the, in the chat, right? And Kevin's comment, if I'm going to read it out loud, I assume, is that I believe it's not possible to navigate grief or loss at the workplace of a person's working for others. And this is, and I want to thank you for writing that, Kevin. But at the same time, I'm going to ask you to allow me to kind of maybe challenge you a little bit on that, which is because on the one hand, and this is where life is so complicated. A, I might be working in a place where that's true, where people are genuinely unsupportive and don't care about other people. But it might also be the case that the way I'm looking at things is shaping how I'm experiencing the reality. That like if I'm going into the idea with the belief that you can't do this, that's going to shape how I interact with the situation and what comes back to me. Right. So if I never tell people, hey, folks, I'm going through something and I'm going to need a little bit of leeway or support, I for sure won't get the leeway and support.
Yeah.
Right. And then in my mind, it will feed the story, because we all have this confirmation bias. Right. We all have this confirmation bias where we use the stuff that happens to us to feed our beliefs. Right.
Mm.
Well, most of the time we should be looking for disconfirmation. So, Sabrina, in response to your question, I think the key is to figure out a way, which might feel a little bit scary, to somehow say something. And I think people are afraid of drawing attention to themselves. And especially if you're feeling threatened, you're afraid, well, now I'm going to become the gazelle who gets picked off, right? I'm going to be the one outside the herd who gets picked off. But again, that's that
Mm.
kind of threat mentality, that kind of scarcity mentality, versus being able to say, okay, I'm going through something and I'm going to tell somebody, right? And how you do that might be an interesting kind of personal growth challenge. Being able to say, look, for example, sitting down with your manager and saying, I'm not at my best at the moment, because I'm going through something and I just want to, and I'm working on it, and I just want to let you know about that.
Mm.
Right. Now
Mm.
and again, I suppose a lot of people are thinking, well, that's crazy. That means they're just going to look for a way to get rid of me. Right. That's, you know, I'll tell you one thing: if you don't take any risks, life will never surprise you.
Yeah, no, I mean, you never
But
know. I guess, yeah.
have you, yeah, what would you do if you were in that situation at work, Sabrina?
Yeah, I guess it was it just brought to mind an experience a couple of years back where
Hmm.
I was it no, more than 2 years, sorry, 4 years ago, where I experienced a kind of a depressive phase following the death of my grandfather, right? And I was giving myself a lot of pressure to just like get on with the program and just focus at work, but it actually affected me more than I expected. So um, it took a lot of energy for me to kind of just keep work and life separate and kind of repress those emotions while I was at work. But then eventually it kind of just festered, and I had to go to my manager and say, hey, I'm dealing with this all these feelings right now. It's very hard for me to focus at work, and I had asked for a couple of weeks off to take care of that. And I actually thought in that moment that I was going to be fired straight away, because I was like, who asked for that, right? But then, my manager was surprisingly gracious and said, okay,
Hmm.
I mean, if that's something that you think you need, you got to call the shots. And I guess, now being on the other side of um, I guess being a manager now, I realize that it's actually better for me to kind of wait out someone's grieving process, or wait out somebody's phase where they're not feeling so good, and let them talk about it openly, and then have them return in a healthier state, right? So yeah.
I really appreciate the courage. For first of all, thank you for sharing that. Thank you for the courage just to share that with us here in this group. And I think a lot of people actually resonate with that. So I'm going to get fired, or I can't show this. I can't be vulnerable.
Yeah.
And I think this is, and that's a really amazing choice you made, right? That unfolded over time. And what I want to emphasize for everybody is please see yourself as somebody making a choice,
Mm.
right? Don't say to yourself, it's not possible for me to share this with people at work. Say to yourself, I'm choosing not to share this with people at work, right? Whatever you do, please make yourself the active agent of what you're doing in your life. This is
Mm.
really, really important. So if I, because if, and it's okay to make that choice. Whatever choice you make, you came to the conclusion in your life, and you needed, you initially tried to do it on your own, and then you realize that's not working. So that's really healthy flexibility, right? But for some people, they're going to want to keep it to themselves, and that's okay, right? But if for your psychological well-being, what you want to do is preserve flexibility, identify what's not working, and do something different, right? But and remember that the way, if we're, and I think a lot of us after COVID and after what's happened post COVID, a lot of us are operating from this scarcity threat mentality, right? That things are feeling very tenuous, and it's like, where's the next thing coming from? And when we're operating
Mm.
from this kind of scarcity mentality, is it going to be ecological disaster? Is it going to be layoffs? Is it going to be, China shrinking and then layoffs spreading around the globe and
Inflation as
recession?
well.
Right, right, right. So, but I think that, and again, I'm not trying to dismiss reality, but I want to deal with the psychological side of things, because when we get into these scarcity mentalities, we may really be looking through a this narrow view, and we're not even aware of it. We think we're seeing the whole picture, but again, as human beings, our psyche, our nervous system has a tendency to kind of shrink the view, and we don't know what's going on. We think we're seeing clearly, but we're not, right? So it can
Yeah.
be really important to be able to, again, slow down a bit, breathe, take stock.
Mm. Mm. And I guess, kind of looking at from the perspective of the organization or the manager, how can, I guess, managers help their teams navigate these losses and changes more in a more safe manner?
Yeah, and again, I want to thank everyone who's listening who is a manager, right, for making the time to be here, because it's so important. Um, you know, I think that the same qualities that make the same behaviors that make a person a manager people want to work for are going to apply doubly so here. So again, the research about this is clear, right? If is being approachable, right? So the sense that people will come to you when they have something, even if it's bad news, that they want to share with you, right? So cultivating that sense of approachability, which means being non-judgmental about personal stuff that people share with you, and that kind of open door attitude of let's, like if you're not talking with people about how they're doing all the time, even if it's just 5-10 minutes a week, right? If you're not having those conversations with people, or at least having that door open without being intrusive, right? There's a good chance they're not going to come to you when there's something going on, right? Because they're going to know that, well, Ben's not interested in that. Now, when someone brings that to you, the thing you want to do is again, think about how that manager responded to you when you came with what you were dealing with after dealing with it on your own. How would you describe their response in a sentence?
I mean, initially caught off guard,
Okay.
but eventually curious. So,
Did you feel
yeah.
judged?
Um, Initially, but then he came round. So
Okay.
I don't know. And I think the feeling of judgment also can be quite subjective, right? Because I mean, I think these things managers also don't know how to respond to, much less like even friends and colleagues around, right? When for example, if someone experiences a breakup within the team or loses a loved one, I
Right.
think conversations like these are just so hard to have. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Or for example, like if there's layoffs or someone leaves the team, right? Because basically, let's say you have a team of 6 people or 5 people, and one of those people gets laid off or fired, right?
Yep.
You have a new team now, whether you realize it or not. And as a manager, their people are going to respond to change in different ways, and some of the folks may have a grief style response, right? Because not only have they lost that coworker, the team is going to reassemble itself. The team is going to reorganize itself in a slightly different way, maybe a really different way. And a manager is going to want to check in with people and just say, how are you doing with this, right?
Yeah.
And I think the most valuable question here as a manager is, especially if people come with how they're responding to change or how they're responding to grief, the most valuable, don't give people advice. Don't tell them how to manage their grief and change, right? I think a lot of people realize this, but it's really important to say it. The normal human response is to want to help. It is overwhelmingly the normal response. It's like, and that's why people give advice. Have you tried X, Y, and Z? Right? You should do X, Y, and Z, right? Don't do that. Don't, right? The single most powerful question as a manager or coworker in that situation is, anybody want to guess what the question is? Because it ain't rocket science.
I don't want to get it wrong.
I know, right? Well, that would be terrible if you got it wrong. So just guess in your head. The single most powerful question is, how can I help? Right? Because that's the interpersonal version of, like I was recommending before, that for all of us when we're going through something like this, we should ask ourselves, what do I need?
Yeah.
Right? The interpersonal version of that between 2 people is, how can I help? Gosh, Sabrina, you're going through something, and I do want to support you. The work needs to get done, but how can I help you? How can I help with this? Right? When someone comes in and shares with you that they're going through something, as a manager, especially because you want to empower your staff, you don't want to necessarily dictate, although it really depends on the person and the role in the organization. The question is, how can I help? What can I do to help you get through this? That's the really powerful question. And absolutely, Hazel, how are you is a question I think managers should be asking folks all the time, even before they come in with something. When you're asking people, how are you as a person, that means that when people are dealing with something, they're going to come in. And then you start a process. It doesn't mean you might be able to do everything they ask for, But as a manager, when Sabrina walked into his office, the individual was caught off guard initially, but once they had a chance to assess the situation, they were supportive.
Mm. Mm. So,
And
yeah, so, oh, I think just for managers, it's a really hard. They're in quite a hard position to be in
yeah,
because they have to. I guess they have to balance performance of the team as well as obviously caring for the team, right? So, what are realistic expectations that managers should have of team members who are grieving or processing a hard time when it comes to a loss?
yeah, I think that because it's a balance.
Mm,
It's a balance of creating a discussion. Because when you started a conversation with how can I help? What can I do to support you? And because maybe someone's going to say, well, look, I want to attend, I want to go to a certain kind of religious ceremony, or I want to go to a support group. So I need to leave early on Thursdays,
mm,
right? And then, or maybe people are going to say, listen, could I be, could I not have any new projects for the next couple of weeks,
mm,
right? So again, but you're starting a discussion, and there might be things. And in the meantime, as a manager, you're assessing this person. You're assessing the history of this person, right? You're saying, has this person been performing well, and are they usually a good worker? Or is this someone whose contribution really isn't that important? And that's going to affect how you respond and how flexible you're going to be. So
mm,
hopefully, you have to decide based on your understanding of this employee's performance, how you're going to be supportive to that person. And when necessary, you're going to have to convey. I think a lot of people already know this, but sometimes you're going to have to say, okay, I want to support you, right? It's my intention to support you. Don't say, and at the same time, we also need to make sure I want to support you in meeting expectations as well.
mm,
So not only do I
mm,
want to support you in dealing with something, but I also want to make sure that you can continue to meet expectations.
mm, mm,
And so it's a two-way conversation, because you don't necessarily, as a manager, have to give them everything they ask for. And this is even harder part, because sometimes you're actually having, you then entered into a negotiation in essence, as a manager, about where can you be flexible and where can you
mm,
not be flexible.
mm, mm. So it's really
But
about the
that's a
manager having that awareness of what is, I guess, the baseline
mhm,
and how long they could, I guess, wait, and
mhm,
how do they help the person that they're managing kind of navigate through
mhm.
all of that.
Yeah, and
Mm,
it's again, it's going to vary so enormously, because some managers might be in a kind of staffing situation that's extraordinarily tight. Some
mm,
people might have someone else on the team. They're like, okay, here's someone else. They just finished something. Let's take this of yours and transfer it over to them, and that's going to give you a little bit more leeway for a couple weeks. But again,
mm,
it's going to vary enormously. But the most important thing, and I want to emphasize this psychologically, the most important thing is not that you give them what they want.
mm, mm,
The most important thing is that you are sincerely interested in helping.
mm,
And there's a difference between those things, that you, like, wishing someone well and sincerely wanting to help doesn't mean you give the person everything they ask for, but you engage in a conversation in good faith,
mm,
right?
mm,
And you try to make it possible for them, and using the resources of your whole team or whatever is available, you try to make it possible for them to be okay within reasonable limits.
yeah, yeah. So it's also up to the
And
manager to define those limits, right?
And I really, well, that's what your manager did. So how did your
Mm.
manager, again, I'm going
Yeah,
to
he
work with the
wouldn't
one
have waited
example
for
we've
like
got. If
three
anybody wants
months.
to share an example, go ahead. Right, right. So you took some time off. What happened in terms of their expectations for you and your performance?
Yeah, so I think what helped was that, he had seen that I had been performing before already,
Hmm.
right? So there was that foundation of trust built. And then, you know, it, I needed help to get back to where I was over the course of, even though I took like 2 weeks off, I still needed about a month and a half to get back to where I was before. So it's a matter of just yeah, kind of recalibrating on a more on a more frequent basis rather than our usual, when Sabrina is performing times.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I genuinely believe that most managers are like your manager. I genuinely believe, something above 51%. I don't know how many and I don't have data, but I believe that they genuinely would like to help if it's
Mm,
possible.
mm,
That's my belief. But you're
yeah,
right. The manager's in this incredibly difficult
yeah.
balancing the needs of what's being pushed down onto them
Mm,
and trying to get their folks to work, right?
and I
But
think there's a lot of pressure that we put on ourselves that, oh, this is something that I can't be bringing to my one-on-one. I can't be sharing this with my manager, but also at the same time, as we're talking about this, it also seems that managers may not have the capacity, or they may not have had that practice to talk about these difficult conversations.
yeah, and this is
Mm,
the thing, and I love the comment that was just made. Just a
mm,
simple "How are you doing today?" will actually make a person's day, right? I mean, as far as I'm concerned, this is management 101, right? And the simple fact of the matter is, a lot of people are promoted and put into these positions because of technical expertise or personal competence, and without being given the kind of managerial training about managing people, right? And this is it's many organizations, of course, big organizations, then invest a ton of money in training in the so-called soft skills. I really hate that term, soft skills, because when you know how to get people to perform, that's not a soft skill. You'll see it in the numbers, right? It's not soft at all. Um, and so, yeah, that asking people, "How are you?" Right? Really is part of that process.
mm, 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 mm.
And checking in with people even once a month, because people are going to remember kindness.
Yeah, for
Because I bet
sure.
everybody watching can remember a time when they received unexpected kindness.
I have lots of questions, and I'd
Hmm.
love to ask for more tips. So, what if this? I'm just going to throw a scenario. So, what if, as a manager or a team member, I know that someone has just experienced a loss, right? With friends who have, lost a partner or lost a
Mm.
parent. Oftentimes they just kind of come back to work and like no one talks about it, even though everyone knows that it just happened, right? So, what are some ways, like really practical, maybe one-liners or tips that can help people bring up the topic and show support?
What kind of organization? Are they working for like an organization full of engineers and everybody's like an engineer or a coder,
Maybe,
or
for
are they working in
example,
advertising?
it could
Full of
be,
extroverts, or are they working? It's because there's so much variability here.
yeah,
Okay, so
yeah,
it's hard to give a guideline, but basically, as a manager, you want to go and speak to that person in private, um, and basically say, um, again, this is management one. You basically want to say, um, I I know that you're going through something. I know that you're going through something. I just wanted to check in with you and see how you're doing. There you go, right?
that's it, yeah.
And then you could say, and if there's anything I can do to help as you go through this, especially with high value employees, with high performing staff, you need to do this. It's very important, because this will actually work as a motivational technique as well for those of you who are interested in that. You just go in and you say, "How are you doing?" Right? You never force anybody to talk, right? Just, "How are you doing?" Now, a lot of the times, what's going to happen when you go and do this, the person's going to be like, "Nope, I'm fine. Don't want to talk about it." Right? And that's fine. You let them do that. You say, "Okay, good." And you just say, "My door is always open," because what you're doing is you're laying the groundwork. You're laying the groundwork for a month later, when you might stop by and say, "How you doing?" Or maybe that person's going to walk into your office, right? You just don't know. But this kind of checking in with people, and that's all you can do,
Yeah.
right? That's pretty much all you can do. Although again, if you have any suggestions about things you think a manager should do in that situation, please feel free to share them in the chat.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I think the idea there is that, yeah, it's just really about opening the door there. And you can't force a person to walk through it, right?
Right?
But at least they know it's open.
And as a manager, your job is to hold the door open, not just open the door, but
Mm,
hold the door open,
mm,
right?
yeah.
And again, it's that's the idea of an open door policy, right? Okay, don't want to
Mm,
talk about it? Fine, I'm here. I
mm-hmm,
think the more challenging situation, Sabrina, is when uh, you see that someone's performance is suffering and they're not
mm,
meeting expectations, and you know that something happening and they're not talking about it,
mm. So then what do
right?
you do, Ben?
I don't know of
Besides.
any other substitute for talk except talking about stuff,
Mm,
right? And creating a reasonably supportive conversation of saying that begins with, um, we need to talk about targets and goals. I want to help you. I want
mm,
to support you to meet these targets and goals. You always start with expressing a positive intention. I want to help you to meet these targets and goals. What's going on,
mm. Yep,
right?
yep.
And then, again, if we're empowering employees versus telling them what to do, they're going to unspool whatever's going on for them, and then you say, okay, well, what's the plan? How can I help you to meet these targets and goals? And if
Mm,
they say, well, I'm going through something and I need your support, then you're on the conversation we were talking about before.
mm, mm. Yeah, I mean, it really is just about creating that space for them
Mhm.
to share and ask
Mhm.
for help when needed.
It's
Mm,
space and connection,
mm,
right?
mm,
It's space and connection.
mm.
Uh,
Yeah.
uh, so you're not only saying how are you, but you really are trying to operate from the sincere wish of, if there's something I can do to help this person that's reasonable and it's possible within the frame of work and within the frame of me as manager, I'd like to be able to do that. Now,
Mm,
again, it's okay to say no. If the person says, I need a week off and the team's working on an incredible deadline and you can't give them a week off, then you can't.
mm,
That's okay. But it'll
yep.
matter that you started the conversation and you're like, okay, well, how about a day? Or how about next week? Right? Or
Mm,
whatever, right? Think of
yep.
it as a negotiation.
Mm, mm,
Yeah, I really love what somebody's written here, Sabrina. I think
yep.
letting them know they're not alone, giving them a safe place to express their thoughts and feelings. They don't want to open up or ready to open up. I think expressing gratitude for their strength is important too. Great
Mm,
point, right? Right. Again, this kind of sense of, I appreciate you and I can see your strength,
yeah.
right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that definitely helps them, yeah, just
Mm-hmm.
feel supported, I think, and
Right.
seen. Yeah.
Nah, that's it, right? That's that connection. That's that sense of connectedness,
Mm,
right? Whether again, because that the open door, that sense you open the door, person doesn't have to walk in. The fact that they
mm,
know the door is there, that's connection.
mm,
And Sophia asks, can we use the OARS method in motivational interviewing for a grieving person? So OARS refers to a set of techniques that is open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries.
mm,
Um, motivational interviewing is a wonderful set of techniques. I use it quite a bit in my work. Um, uh, the Absolutely, right. Uh, on the caveat, Sophia, that the other person has consented to be in the conversation. If the other
mm,
person doesn't want to talk, we should not use ORs to make them talk,
mm,
right? Or to generate a conversation they really didn't want to participate in to begin with. But if the person shows an interest and a willingness to open up, ORS is an absolutely great way to go, especially because it's very non-judgmental.
mm,
And
mm.
this sense of affirming someone for their strengths, for their work ethic, for their conscientiousness, for whatever it is they're bringing to the team, to the organization, super important.
Yeah, for sure. So I still have a couple of questions around, for the individual who is processing these losses, or experiencing grief, right? So obviously, grief can affect our ability to focus or even interact with other people at work. Um, so, are there any other strategies for kind of like balancing that professionalism as well as managing your personal grief and loss while at work?
Yeah, so when you say managing professionalism,
Mm,
it's really interesting because I think that that's what people really try to do.
mm,
It's like I don't want to cry at work, and I don't want to break down at work. I don't want to lose my cool at work,
mm,
and I think people are really concerned about that, and fair enough. You know, there's a negative side to that. There's a negative side to that, which is that people are unwilling to be vulnerable, and it took a lot of courage on your part, for example, that you um, were had to work at it to be vulnerable and say, "Hey, I'm going through something," to open yourself up.
mm,
But to the degree that people want to support their professionalism, you don't want to let stuff build up
mm,
or whatever's, especially, someone, a lot of people have pointed out in the chat that grieving's not linear. There's no timeline, there's no deadline, and it's not linear in the sense that you might be great for a month and then one day, right? So I think that you have to have a set of strategies,
mm,
and you have to be willing to take your own temperature,
mhm,
right? You have to ask yourself on a Monday morning or a Sunday night, or maybe every morning, you have to ask yourself, how am I doing? And what's gonna, I strongly recommend to everybody that there's got to be 3 minutes in your morning routine where you stop, you take a few breaths, and you check in and you say, how am I doing today?
mm,
Right? And where am I at with my emotions and my reactions to change or my grief? How am I doing with that today? And what do I want to be aware of as I go through just today? I think this is a really important technique because I think a lot of the times where people lose it, it's one of two things. And tell me what you think, Sabrina. I think it's
mm,
one of two things that happens when people kind of lose their professionalism. Number one is they let it build up. They knew that it was building up, and they let it build up, right? They didn't take, an hour or something to do whatever it is to release some of the steam, whether that would be to go exercise for an extra hour or go cry for 30 minutes or talk to a friend or just take a walk in the park or maybe go to work a little bit late and let some of that off. And then something happened that just pushed it over the edge,
mm, mm.
right?
Yep.
I think that's probably one of the most common ways. And I think for me, number two, those are not the only ways. I think these are the two most common. And I think the second most common way is they got caught by surprise by something that triggered them.
Mm. Yeah.
Like something came up in a meeting, and
Mm.
before they knew it, they were just overwhelmed,
Mhm. Mhm. No, as you're
right?
saying
And
that, Ben, I'm like, yeah, I've totally been there before.
me too.
Yeah, we're all human here.
I can I,
So.
I can always see it, and I can feel it. In my conversations with clients,
Mm,
in the work that I do, where part of my work is simply to listen and to create a space where a person can be vulnerable and share very charged stuff.
mm,
And over the course of time, as I do my job, I've learned I'm kind of like a container. And there's a specific feeling that comes up when I get close to full.
mm,
And if I don't do something, if I don't take care of that, and there's a bunch of different things I can do to take care of it, when I'm full, my responses to folks who are looking to me for help, my responses are really suboptimal,
mm.
right? I get impatient.
Yeah.
I get snappy. I will. Sometimes I can even be a jerk in response to things that people say.
Yeah.
And most of the time, it's because I knew that I was like, okay, I've gotten full. So
Mm.
now I need to actually, you know what, all that stuff I was planning to do this weekend, I got to let go of that. And I've got to do something to create some more space in me if
Yeah.
I want to maintain. Or, right, sometimes, and this is not what people want to hear from their psychologist, sometimes I got to go in and say, you know what, I'm going to do my best today, but today is not a great day for me, right? But that is
Yeah.
not something I want to say to people on a regular basis.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think just having that awareness of where you are that day, and
Yeah.
then let's start. I mean, it starts from there, and then knowing that okay, there's just a few strategies I can do for myself to just let go of those emotions
Hmm.
proactively helps a lot with finding that balance between, I guess, like composure and professionalism while at work, while you're still in that process of grieving. Because I think as Jenny pointed out, grieving is not a linear process. I think a lot of them a lot of us think that, okay, this really terrible thing happened in my life and I'll get over it in 2 weeks and then move on. But it's just not like that, right? It's
Yeah,
really about, yeah, checking in every day and seeing where we are.
and giving yourself permission to be where you are, Sabrina.
Mm,
Right? Because this is, if you're going to accept that grieving is not a linear process, you got to get rid of all this again baloney of 5 stages of grief
mm,
and the blah blah and whatever somebody said on TikTok. You really, that's not, it's not going to help you. Somebody else's experience might be useful for you, but it might not. And you really need to the 2 points that we started with. You need to name that you're going through something. I don't care what you call it. You can call it grief. You can say, I'm dealing with change. I'm adjusting to a change. You got to name that you're going through something. You got to accept that you too are human, and that that this is a normal human thing to happen. And you, the more you fight with it, the more poorly it's going to go. Versus saying, okay, this is where I'm at, and how am I going to get through this?
yeah, yeah. Ben, as you're saying that, I just remember the times I spent in our mindful self-compassion course.
Hmm.
And yeah, I think self-compassion is really the key to being kind to ourselves and allowing ourselves to recognize where we are and to fully accept where we are and to ask ourselves what we need and honor that, right? So I think along those lines, as we're closing the chat, around mindful self-compassion, are there any other techniques we can take away with us, as if we're going through a loss right now or grieving
What was
something?
the most useful technique that you would recommend from the MSC
Ah,
course,
yeah.
Sabrina, that you like
I
in
think,
30 seconds?
oh my God, soothing touch.
Soothing
Just
touch, right?
really, and
Right.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
Hmm.
And the very powerful one for me was asking myself what I needed because there are lots of affirmations and
Right. So
yeah. So
So this is, yeah, and absolutely. And again, I've got some videos on YouTube teaching people how to do soothing touch. So feel free to search for my name on YouTube and soothing touch, and you'll find some instructions on how to do that. One that Sabrina just mentioned. I practice it almost when anytime I wake up in the middle of the night, like 2 a.m., 3 a.m. Soothing touch is part of how I get back to sleep. I practice this many times a week. But self-compassion starts with two fundamentals. Number one, you are a human being. You're not weak. You're not defective, right? You're a human being, and being human's messy, imperfect, messy, and that's not going to change. And really acknowledging that and honoring that, right, is this core of self-compassion. And number two, being able to ask yourself, while I'm going through something, what do I need to bring out my best?
mm,
Right? And being able to kind of take stock for yourself 5 minutes a week. Sit down for 5 minutes a week and just ask, okay, what do I need? If when I'm going through something, what do I need? And do I need to ask for help? Right? Do I need to tell somebody because I'm going to need more leeway here because I'm trying to do too much and that's not working. And that's self-compassion already, right? Because sometimes self-compassion doesn't just mean kindness, it means courage, like the
yeah.
courage you've demonstrated in that example and throughout your life, Sabrina.
I'm trying my best in my own messy way.
Hmm.
Yeah, and yeah, I think it's not just yeah, not just a matter of doing it on our own, right? It's just recognizing that there is support all around us, and we
Hmm.
have that power to activate it when we know what we need. So, yeah. Ben, thank you so much for sharing. Is there anything else you'd like to share about navigating grief and loss, self compassion that our audience should hear?
Nope. I think
Nope.
that those points really capture it, right? There's no you're not doing it wrong, right? It's there's a lot of different ways to be a human being,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Anywhere, any way that we choose to do it,
hmm
it's completely okay. All right, Ben. So,
hmm
how can they find you?
You can look for my channel on YouTube at Ben Weinstein. You can find me at benweinstein.com. And you can find my channel on YouTube, and I'm on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect with people on LinkedIn as well.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Ben. Thanks for
Thanks,
the chat
Sabrina. Thanks so
today.
much, everybody.
See you.